play it anytime you want. I love that guitar.
It's not. I'm sorry.
You never play
It can't compete. I have to show you a picture before we start.
Of your guitar?
Yeah. Sorry, it's a good guitar, but it's not. It's a real one as well.
It really is.
1956. I was on Jonathan Ross's show in London with Priscilla.
She brought the guitar.
Yeah, they bring it on white gloves, and apparently I'm the fourth person to have played it. So Elvis, Mac Davis, Paul McCartney, and me.
And you.
That's what that's what they say. And they bring it on like it's a Ming vase. And
Kind
then,
of is.
And they say, now play a song. What the hell are you going to play?
What did you play?
I played. I thought, well, I've got to sing an Elvis song, and I think they wanted me to, being England, they think I'll probably sing Jailhouse Rock or something, something that everybody knows. Or, I sang Don't. You know that song?
I've heard it, yeah.
That's what you say. But they cut that bit out, and then I took it into Alice, and they just kept that bit.
And they could.
So there's Priscilla sitting next to me, and I tagged the song with a couple of lines from Suspicious Minds.
That's the song when I first started to like Elvis. It was that era, Suspicious Minds.
Yeah. I'm actually pretty much the same. I know I'm older than you, but I didn't hear him when he first started out. My folks didn't listen to that kind of music, so I didn't. And then when I did tune him in, because the girl next door listened to him, he was singing those "It's Now or Never" things. When you're like 9, that sounded a bit. That didn't sound very groovy to me.
No, not at all.
It didn't catch my imagination at all. Then later on, you'd go to the pictures, and they would have his trailers for his movies on, and they were, Elvis on a surfboard, Elvis in Hawaii. Like they weren't very good songs either.
No.
It took me until I heard those ones at Suspicious Minds in the late '60s. Then I went back and heard all the first ones, and I thought, oh wow, they're great. Now I know what the fuss is about. It's an odd thing, given the name.
Well, but you took the name because of him, and I heard after he passed.
No, I didn't. I think my managers might have had that in their mind. But, I think they just wanted me to stand out. So what better way than to take a name that's so, what else? Like I said in the book,
yeah.
I mean, when he died, like a couple of weeks into our career, there was this moment of panic in the office. Like, can we go through with this? Because this is like a global. I mean, now it would be so different because of the way we're all connected. In those days, you still had to wait for the news to reach you from America. So it was
right.
a little bit different than when we know it to be now. Nevertheless, they were ringing up within a couple of weeks and asking me to be on American TV just because of the novelty of finding a guy with that name. And I'm so glad that we had the presence of mind to go, no, not going to do that. I want to be known, but I want to be known for what I'm doing, not for some freaky thing.
Are you a reflective person in general?
Man, I might have become more so in finishing a book of 670 pages. I mean, you have to be somewhat reflective. I mean, I'm not, nostalgic is a good thing. I'm not in the slightest bit nostalgic. I think it's important when you write to be able to evoke scenes, with the words and imagine them, try and remember how particular sensations felt like, even the physical things of how a machine works like a record player, which was obviously the way I heard music first, and the sensations like hearing my father's voice vibrating the glass in the front room, door while he was practicing, because he was a radio dance band singer, and that gave me the gift of a lot of free records. Right. Anybody that grew up in radio knows there's a lot of free records, and I got the benefit of those, which gave me a different look on music than my friends whose parents were telling them to turn the very same records down. My dad was turning them up in the front room and singing along with them. As extraordinary as it may seem, that he was singing songs straight out of the charts. That's what they did.
Your dad also got to play on the same set with McCartney, didn't he, at some point?
He was on the Royal Variety Show, the Royal Command Performance, which was a big variety show. And it was, quite an honor to be on with royalty in those days. I mean, people's attitude to it was much more craven. And, the dance band that he sang with were pretty well established. And so they had him on the bill with these upstarts from Liverpool who just had a couple of hits. And, you have one of these ebooks. Or there's an edition of the book like that, and I was able to attach an appendix of other images that I've written about in the book. So there's about 200 other images that aren't printed in the print edition. Among them, 3 pages from from the very grand program from this variety show from 1963. It has a spectacular cover with all calligraphy, and then inside little pen pictures of the acts. And seventh on the bill, there they are, the Beatles, the One Direction of that year, you know, and 12th on the bill, the Joe Loss Orchestra that my dad sang with. And then further up the bill, Marlon Dietrich, accompanied by Burt Bacharach. And they didn't even spell his name right.
No, he's your friend. He became your friend.
Well, both, you know, it's odd. I mean, I'm not, so I was destined to do this, you know.
But maybe you were, Elvis.
Well, I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I don't know how, it depends on how voodoo you want to be about it. But it was, no, it was a very big coincidence that my father got to work with those two people I collaborated with. But at the time, I was 10 years old and totally in the thrall of the Beatles. And the fact that my dad, you know, was going to be on the bill with them was much more important to me than he was going to play for the Queen Mother. I mean, it didn't matter to me at all about that. I asked him to get their autographs, and he got them as well. Got them all on one sheet of paper.
Do you still have that?
I cut it into 4 pieces of paper because it didn't fit in my autograph book. And I mean, it's such, people who have a fetish about those things know that, you know, that's obviously lessens their value not to have them in one sheet. But at the time, it was just practical.
It made perfect sense.
But I still have it, yeah, I have. He was very kind, you know, I mean, it must have been mortifying for him. He would have only been in his mid-30s. He wasn't like he was an old guy. He was quite hip, you know, and liked the music that he had to sing. But he would faithfully take along my autograph book and bring home a little souvenir from the people that appeared on the radio show, you know. And it was a glimpse into popular music that my friends didn't have, you know. I'd go with him to the radio broadcast rehearsals when I was off school. That was pretty thrilling as a kid.
Having listened to your whole career, what's interesting is that not all of those influences popped up in your first work. It's almost as if it was a time release, that over time I started to hear more and more of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's actually true, though, but that's because I think that's true for everybody. It's what I've done with it's a little bit different because I write music. But the truth of it is you often hear music and don't understand it, and then if you're patient enough and you're lucky enough, the music itself reveals itself to you when you need it in your life. I mean, I was aware of Frank Sinatra singing When Your Lover Is Gone when I was 5 or younger than that, because my parents played those kind of records in the house by choice rather than contemporary rock and roll records. But I had to be 25, 27 before a song like that, as bereft as that, had any meaning to me. Then that's all I wanted to hear. You know, that's when I'm making like my 4th or 5th album. I wasn't listening to the music that we were making. The emotional, you know, underpinning of it were all these songs by these great songwriters. I suppose the ones we call the Great American Songbook, or the standards as they're now known, because people cover them in songbook form. But they were just the hit tunes of their day, weren't they? You know, the jazz musicians pulled apart and put back together, and people like my wife interpret, you know. I mean, Diana knows all those songs.
So when Diana plays them for you, do you hear them differently than you would have the first time?
Well, I hear them differently when she plays them for very different reasons. I mean, when I'm sitting in the audience and she'll play something and allude to songs in passing the way a jazz player can, you know, there's all sorts of little messages and, you know, things that are, it's not like she's speaking to me alone, but I hear her allude to songs and I notice the wit with which she can do that. And she, you know, she would be very quick to play down her ability to explain things, but you don't need to explain things if you can play the piano like that.
Right.
You know, she doesn't intellectualize what she's doing. She's instinctive and an emotional player and has such a knowledge of music. But we have this similar experience of growing up in a house filled with music that isn't necessarily the music that belongs to our generation, but became significant to us at different times in our life. And with her, the music that her dad gave her, music from the 1920s particularly, became really persuasive to her in quite recent times. For me, the music that I heard as a little child came back into my life in my 20s and helped me get through transitions in my life and helped me understand how to write different types of songs. Otherwise, I've been writing the same little 3-chord trick for the rest of my life.
Right. At some point you decided, did you realize at one point you had limited, like you needed an outside force, an outside influence?
Well, I think you should learn from everything that you listen to and play. I was always curious about different types of music because I'd grown up with all this music in the house and didn't see the name tags that other people attached to it. they acted like borderlines or stop signs to some people. Mm-hmm. To me, they acted like invitations. That's just the way it was, and I'm grateful for that curiosity that was instilled in me by as much by my mother as my father, because my mother kind of sold records, and therefore she had to know all about the record catalog because she didn't have a computer to refer to. You had to look it up in a book and memorize things, and she was very knowledgeable about music, my mother, as a listener, as an appreciator of music to this day.
Do you have any memories of her, specific ones of her sitting down and saying, Declan, listen to this song?
No, not so much. Just so I knew the names of jazz musicians, and then they'd play those records, and they would sound like insane, Charlie Parker and stuff like that. But I did like Sinatra, and I liked Ella Fitzgerald. I liked the sounds of their voices and those sounds of those orchestras. But it took me a long while to work out what the hell was going on a Coleman Hawkins record. And then when I did, because it was familiar from infancy, I didn't have the boundary that perhaps some of my friends said, oh, jazz, that's intellectual. And it's not, it's emotional,
One of my favorite parts of the book is that little moment in the last act of you and Solomon Burke. And I think Solomon Burke is one of these great singers that not a lot of people have spent a lot of time learning about.
No,
perhaps even a bit of a madman. I never met him, but he had that real aura of. There was danger. It felt like around Solomon.
Yeah, he was the king of rock and soul.
He would tell you that too, right?
Yeah, no, it was a. I mean, I'd written a song for him at the behest of my friend Joe Henry, who had recorded a great record on Solomon, singing songs by Nick Lowe and Dan Penn, and I found myself in some pretty good company on that record, and I'd been in the studio when I'd recorded, so I got to know him that much. I'd showed him how the song went, because I had a couple of little tricky little things I'd written which seemed to trip him up every time he was trying to get flying, because his thing was to really let go on a song emotionally. And then I got to be on the bill with him in this show in Cleveland, where it was a big tribute show to Sam Cooke that I'd got talked into doing, ill-advised kind of thing that I just wanted to go because there were so many great singers on the bill. I thought, well, I'll get to sing my little song in the first half, and I can sit up in the balcony and enjoy a free show with Solomon Burke and Aretha Franklin. And then they told me I was singing between Solomon Burke and Aretha Franklin, which was slightly more intimidating prospect.
Between those two vocalists.
Yeah.
Did you warm up?
Yeah. And so when Solomon, he made this big speech. He was on his throne. He used to sit on this big throne, and he made his speech. Sam Cooke, he handed the torch to me, and I'm handing it tonight to my son. And he didn't sing. He handed the responsibility for the song over to his son. And I'm in the wings wiping my brow because I feel I've dodged the bullet, and I was able to go out and do my songs. And then Aretha came out and did her songs. And still nobody had sung The Change Is Gonna Come, which is perhaps the most famous resonant song that Sam Cooke wrote. Of course, it was all a body swerve by Solomon. He was going to close the show singing Change Is Gonna Come. Smart. The whole thing was a very chaotic organization, and then
you've been part of that before, though.
Yeah, and then it ended up with him and Aretha trading vocal lines, and they had never sung together, even though they were contemporaries. They had never sung until that night, so we all just stood back. They were telling us, "You've got to go out and join them on the chorus." I said, "Are you crazy? I'm not going out there. That's frightening. I'm not doing that."
How did it sound? Out of this world?
It sounded great, yeah. It was very spontaneous, and in the end, there was Whitney's mother, Cissy Houston, was there, the Manhattans, all these R&B singers, William Bell, and these singers of from the 1960s and 70s, and a couple of other younger singers were on the bill, and I was the interloper, I was like the music fan that somehow got on the bill.
What's funny about this, because I was in the studio to watch you tape Spectacle, and I've seen you host a talk show with Letterman, and you've in a strange way, you do all of these jobs, right? And you're also the guy that makes those records. So you can be the interviewer, as you have been. You have been the guy that gets interviewed. And in a way...
I'm forgetting that it was... of course, it was seen a lot more in Canada, and because the show was shown here, it was commissioned by CTV and Sundance. It was known as a cable show, but it was shown more on, it seemed like regular television, if that's the word for it, and then everybody had access to it. And it was an odd experience, because obviously people that we had as our guests trusted me a little bit more because I was...
You're you.
They weren't suspicious like they are of you,
right. As they ought to be.
As they ought to be. No, there were people, because no matter who they are, like there's a big difference, obviously, in the music of Lou Reed and the music of Renee Fleming, but we still just go onto the stage with the intention of telling a story, made out of words and music. So that alone meant that we had that much in common, even if everything else in our experience was different. And that definitely counted in my favor, because all in terms of technique, I was a complete novice. I knew not how to speak at the wrong moment, or twitch with the clipboard, or scratch myself at inappropriate moments, or all those things. But the fact that we got to share playing music together also seemed to create some sort of framework for it. And I was also amazingly given the opportunity to put some people who I'd loved for a long time on a larger stage. I didn't realize, I couldn't imagine there was any world that was real to me that didn't know who Jesse Winchester was. But a lot of people told me later that was the first time that they'd ever heard him when he appeared on the show, and yet he made everybody in the studio cry.
Let's request one of those songs. Which one should we play? I'll play one on the radio show. Which Jesse song?
Well, there's so many beautiful songs. I would say, I still love the song I covered, Payday. I just love that song because it has the line, "A heart as big as your mama's stove and her body like Brigitte Bardot." It's like one of my favorite lines in rock and roll.
We'll play that. Which Aretha Franklin song really hits you hard?
That whole album, I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You, was the first Aretha record that I owned, the album, and it has so many great songs on it.
There's that outtake and B-sides album that came out where it's her in the studio for one of the first times recording that vocal track.
Yeah.
Stunning.
It's an amazing performance. Do Right Woman from that record is pretty startling. We very nearly, we got to the point where we were trying to work out a third season of Spectacle, and I actually had, in the book I described it like getting Aretha on the phone, which was a very big surprise. I didn't expect that she would answer when I called this number. I thought I would get the third assistant lady in waiting to the Queen of Soul. I didn't expect to get Aretha directly. And she listened to my pitch, which was basically to sit at the piano and talk about what the piano meant to her, because I think that's a story that hasn't been told about her. They've told the story of her life in playing for her father in the gospel church, and they've told the story of all the records she made pretty well. But I don't know that anybody's ever asked her about that. She's a completely different prospect as a singer when she's behind the piano, because she's driving the band as well. She's an amazing piano player. In a way that, Nina Simone, so you've got a picture of Nina Simone there. It's the same kind of prospect. When she's behind the piano, it makes everything happen in a different way. Not that I don't love her just standing there and singing, but that was a conversation I wished I'd had, but it wasn't to be, and we were lucky to get the people we got, and your luck runs out, or the money, whichever comes first.
You could make a show again if you wanted to. I was there
20 was a good number to do,
That's a lot of episodes.
That's a lot of episodes, and people still ask me about them. There's only really a couple of things I get asked about on a regular basis, and it's that show and like being in the band at the Black and White night with Roy Orbison. Yeah. Dinah and I were home one night on Vancouver Island, and they were showing it on the CBC on the telethon, as they tend to do, and we rang up and pledged money. Did you? And when we gave our name, they wouldn't believe it was us. They thought we were kidding. And I said, "No, I want to give some money. I'm so really pleased you're showing this. I'm really enjoying it."
To watch you and Roy.
Yeah, can you play that bit again when I'm on camera? I'm in the background there playing acoustic guitar.
Tell me about that time that you thought you were going to do a duet with Bob Dylan, and you ended up having to carry all the vocals.
Oh, when I was on tour with Bob Dylan, I think it was 2008. I was in the middle of the bill of the Bob Dylan show, as they were calling the show at that time. Bob and his band, and Amos Lee, who had a hit at the time, and he was opening up. And I went on with just acoustic, played about 40 minutes in the middle of the show. And then one day Bob asked me to come up on the stage at soundcheck and said, I'm trying to think of a way to get you into the act. And it was so weird the way he said it, like we were old vaudevillians, like we're going to do some juggling, And he suggested us doing Peace, Love and Understanding, which I then had to remind him I didn't write.
Nick wrote that.
Yeah, Nick Lowe wrote that. So I figured it would be trying the patience of his audience if I walked up in the middle of his show and sang a song associated with me, So in the end I suggested a couple of very, very rare choices, because I figured he's not going to want to do Blowing in the Wind, with me. And then we settled on this beautiful song, Tears of Rage, and we didn't do it immediately. And then about a week later, he called me up to the stage, and we went out there with a couple of, and he didn't call the band, which was something he hadn't done for a while. So the audience went crazy.
Yeah, you never see him just him and a guitar.
No, and this was the first time. They told me later, like 14 years or something since he'd stepped up there without a band behind him. So of course, there's people in his audience that read everything as a sign of some kind of a little unnerving. And we wandered out there and started singing, or I started singing, and he just didn't sing. And it was, it was really strange. And then he came in the harmony on the chorus, and then the next verse, he sang a bit more. And by the third time round, he came in, and I looked at him, because I've learned from previous experience of singing with him, you never look away. You don't want to look away.
Guess you'll change it up.
It's a very intense thing, I mean, it's really, you know that from everything he's written. And in the moment that I looked at him, I knew he was going to sing. And he sang a line that isn't in the song, or apparently in it. Maybe it was another draft of the lyric.
That's what apparently he has all these other verses that
he's got these other verses, but the line he sang, which I was supposed to answer, didn't rhyme with the line that I knew. So there's like a moment of complete panic. But it's not. This is all happening in slow motion now, like a car crash, And so in the moment that it was obviously only a split second that you had to do this. I somehow resolved it. Well, hit the guitar with such force that he actually cracked up, which is my favorite memory of it, because those people in the audience that were reading into this way too much, missed the point that you have to retain some humanity. No matter, he'd written this song. It's a very beautiful, very soulful, intense song. But if you had to carry yourself in this pretentious way in every gesture, it would just drain you of the will to do it at all.
Which is why he does it.
Yeah, you see the wit of the wit and humor that's in so many of the things. People are taking it so seriously, they miss a lot of the beauty.
What did you make of the process of writing this book? Like, did you obviously there's lots of humanity and beauty in it, but was it arduous at any point?
I got exasperated with myself. I mean, I started to write 10 years ago. I had all sorts of different master plans for how I was going to approach the prospect of writing a book, and started and stopped 2 or 3 times. There were reasons why I put it aside for a moment or two. So it took me until about 4.5 years ago to really go to work. And there were interruptions with bereavements. I lost my father, and in some ways focused my mind on really gathering my thoughts about the experiences we'd had together. Talked to him about his father, because it seemed as much that my grandfather, had a much harsher life than I did. He was an orphan who got out of an orphanage by playing the trumpet. I mean, he got out of the orphanage to go and be in the army. Got shot. Got out of the army to be as a ship's musician. And
Was that Pat?
Pat McManus? Yeah. I mean, that's his story to me is one of escape. And of course it sounds romantic. But I don't suppose it was very romantic lying undiscovered in a ditch in France with a bullet in you.
No.
And, going to America in those days, in the 1920s, when he eventually got a job just playing music without any obvious danger involved, that was a journey that many people of his background only took in one direction. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he went and came home to what later became his wife and my father, who was then an infant, and brought a bit of money, a bit more money than a man of his background might have had, for a few years, was something that made me think, well, that's one example of how to get through life.
Right.
Then my father had a job in music from the age of 21 to, he stopped performing in the 90s, and he was still performing until the early 90s.
So you can keep going then.
It looks like I might have to.
Just to keep it all going.
Just to keep it going.
If I say Nick Lowe, what do you think?
Well, I mean, he's among England's finest, and undoubtedly. I put Nick right up there with Joe Strummer and Ray Davies and Richard Thompson and all the people I love. And, in many ways, I mean, Lennon and McCartney tend to tower above everybody. But, if you put all Nick's really great songs, you can make a case for him just as much as anybody that I've ever loved, Marion Lane or, Pete Townsend. I mean, he's got lots of great songs. They don't necessarily dwell on the epic stage like Pete Townsend songs. They're more intimate. But, he wrote Peace, Love and Understanding, but he also wrote I'm a Mess.
Right.
Or The Beast in Me for Johnny Cash.
So great.
Such great songs.
When you walked into the house today to do the show, you gravitated right towards the picture I have of Joe Strummer there. What does Joe mean to you?
Well, I mean, I wrote a little, I started out the book with not I Was Born, because I was never going to tell the story governed by the calendar. I'd wanted it to be about the sensations of music and where it led me. So I started the book as a child watching my dad play music. By chapter 3, I decided to jump ahead, and try to locate all of this, to connect it to my career. And the entry point I chose was actually being in a room with three of the Clash in 1977, because I thought, well, people don't know this. They have no way of knowing this crazy drunken night that we just happened to be out on the town in Liège, having both played at some dreadful festival in the woods, you know. And there was this curious little episode where Mick and Paul were like teasing Joe, because they had spotted that like there was a very slight resemblance between Joe and me at that age, and there were some pictures of him wearing horn rims like mine, and they'd obviously seen, it was when he was in the group the 101ers, and they were giving him, you know, the way bands do, they tease, and particularly as the front man, they got to get at him somehow because he had such facility with words, and they were going, you know, Simonon is going, give him your glasses, Costello, you know, and eventually I had to give him up. So I can't swear to what he looked like because I couldn't see him, of course, but they all laughed, so I guess it must have been true. But the reason I told it wasn't sort of because, hey, I was, you know, hanging out with the Clash. I mean, obviously we were contemporaries, but more that it was like we were a bunch of kids. It was like you know, just a bunch of kids fooling around. And then, of course, if we'd been in the spotlight or under scrutiny, we would have probably gone into our separate camps, you know, more competitive, and undoubtedly were at other times, you know.
Well, these days it seems like there's so much spotlight all the time. Other musicians.
Yeah, you couldn't get away with half of the things that went on. I suppose now, you know, some of the mischief would just get too reported, and it would all be ridiculed.
But the mischief can sometimes fuel the future art, right? So without that mischief, do you think that what people create will suffer because there's so much glare?
I have no idea. I have no comment to really make on that, because I would be assuming that I knew exactly how it went for younger people. They'd find their way. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes when I hear people speak, they seem to be speaking about like their business model more than their artistic motivation. I know other people that are completely absorbed with a much wider range of music than I had, you know, I could possibly have known at the same age. The difference was that I suppose the one or two records that penetrated the fog of light entertainment in England, you know, became very, very persuasive to me. And when I've picked up the cues of like one or two songs on a compilation record and came to North America for the first time and discovered second-hand stores and pawn shops full of discarded albums by the best music I'd ever heard, and it was all just available, you know, for pennies. And I went home with a whole suitcase full of records. And that would be like the equivalent of going on a really creative search on the internet now. But I mean, it took a little longer, and in some ways, you know, I got some interesting clothes in those second-hand stores while I was getting the music as well. A couple of marching band outfits that we'd turn up in.
Who do you love now, musically?
I tend to avoid saying the names of
Well, I'm just looking for them to play on the show.
Oh,
yeah.
no. Well, I mean, yeah, I hate all music now. I just did I just did my last tour. I mean, I know the last time I was in Toronto, I played at Massey Hall, I think, and in a solo performance. Since then, the idea of the show has become a little bit more, more of a playground for me to live in. I built myself I had built for me a television set onto which I can project images of notable musicians or cultural figures from the town I'm in, to see whether the people recognize them, frankly. You know, sometimes, but I won't put like a contemporary person up always, although you never know. If you come to the show, it might be you. It could always, yeah. No, but I mean, I throw images up there, some of which have now appeared in the book, some of them members of my family, because I'm singing songs connected to their life. And I found it was sort of a preface in a way to the book, this tour. It's called Detour by its very nature. It takes a circuitous route through the songbook. I'm not promoting an album or any of that kind of nonsense anymore. I've got all these songs, and I try to construct some kind of story made up every night. Yeah, and so having this little playground, I also got rid of all the directional mics on the stage, which are the thing that makes everything sound very harsh. Right. And I just mic everything very open, so I'm able to play the way I would with you now. I have one guitar that's not plugged into anything, and I'm singing, and my voice and the guitar are just going onto one microphone. I'm using that as much as possible. I have amplified instruments as well, so that I can make a nice, attractive noise. If you need to. Sometimes quite a lot of noise. But I borrowed one of Diana's old pianos, which is a 1927 Chickering upright. It's one of the first grand pianos made in America, and wow. they just have a quirkier feel and tone that suits somebody who can't really play the piano. That sounds like you're in the rehearsal room trying to learn your exercises, and that's about as well as I play the piano. So I just play a modest accompaniment, and again, my voice is just picking up on everything. And I found that it just brings me a little. I'm trying to get closer. And I mostly play solo, but I have a couple of girls that come out of Atlanta, Georgia, called Larkin Poe, who've been singing with me, Rebecca and Megan Lovell. They've added some beautiful harmonies to some of the episodes in the show, and they have a good record. They have a record called Kin. Take a listen to, I don't know, just pick any track.
We'll do it right now.
Yeah, pick that.
What a pleasure to see you. Thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you, man.
Real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.